Bienvenidos al punto de encuentro entre el análisis económico, los negocios internacionales y las ideas que transforman el mundo. El espacio que te ayuda a entender mejor el mundo de los negocios y la economía global. El futuro de los negocios está aquí. Negocios sin frontera, con Eduardo Mendívil y Samuel Peña. ¡Comenzamos!
Muy buenas tardes, estimados amigos. Los saludo con gusto su servidor Eduardo Alonso Mendívil en esta nueva edición de Negocios sin Fronteras, el programa de análisis de la Escuela de Negocios Internacionales del TEC de Monterrey, donde es un verdadero honor compartir con ustedes la actualidad empresarial de los negocios internacionales del comercio global. Esta tarde de viernes con un programa especial transmitiendo en vivo desde la ciudad de Washington, D.C., con analistas específicos de la Universidad George Washington, que nos platicarán acerca de este importante tema de la política comercial, de los aranceles de la administración del presidente Donald Trump y de la decisión de la Suprema Corte de Justicia para invalidar estos aranceles bajo la ley de emergencia económica, un tema que hemos hablado frecuentemente en este espacio y que el día de hoy analizaremos a profundidad con especialistas desde la capital de Estados Unidos. So it's my pleasure and my privilege to present you with our experts of today's program, talking about tariffs and global trade, specifically about tariffs on the public trade policy of the President Donald Trump administration in the United States. Today with us we have Josephine Gray, investigator and researcher from the University of George Washington in Washington, D.C. Josephine, welcome to Monterey Tech.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Also, we have Sarah Nersesov from New York, also a researcher and a student at the Law School of George Washington University. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Sarah. And last but not least, the tremendous professor of international law, multi-laureate, teacher, friend, and professional attorney, Mr. Charles Kemp. Welcome, Charles, again to the program.
I love being on your program, Eduardo. It's always a great honor.
It's a pleasure to have you, Charles. Well, we're going to talk about these specific public policy trade that the Trump administration has been put in place and has been subject of daily news in every single corner of the world. We're going to start talking about tariffs, the nature of it, how it has been implemented by the Trump administration, and then we're going to talk about the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court to invalidate those tariffs under the IEEPA, the Economic Emergency Act. Josephine, Sarah, Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, there's a famous editorialist who works for the New York Times, David French, and this weekend he published an opinion saying that this decision by the Supreme Court is probably the most important decision the Supreme Court is going to issue this century, which is a pretty big deal. It clearly it delineates talks about the power of the president. As you know, we have a president who believes, in some ways, he's a king. Other times he believes he's a dictator, which he says is a good thing. But sometimes you need a dictator. And so the United States is at a critical period when, and thankfully we have a Supreme Court that is standing up and for the rule of law and as it's set forth in our Constitution to delineate what powers the president has and what powers the president doesn't have. And it's what's really interesting, and we'll talk more in detail about it, is there are a number of decisions. There are about five actually 6 decisions within the entire decision. The entire decision from the Supreme Court is 107 pages. There's the opinion of the court, and then there is a concurring opinion by Justice Gorsuch, who was appointed by Trump in 2017. And Gorsuch is the one who states so importantly that that this decision isn't anti-administration, it is pro-Congress. And he makes the point, Justice Gorsuch in his opinion makes the point that once a power is given or assumed to exist with the president, it's almost impossible to get it back, because what president is going to agree to restrict their powers, which he would have to do with a piece of legislation, and the president would never agree to sign that. And so he views this as critical, to restrain the power of the president by making it clear that the power to impose tariffs is something that it's a legislative power held solely by Congress.
Yeah.
In fact, he says the major questions doctrine, which we're going to get to, it's kind of a way to interpret legislation in the Constitution. He says the major questions doctrine, which says, in a nutshell, the president only has the power to make major questions if the delegation is explicit from Congress. It has to be extremely explicit. And here the majority decided, Gorsuch agrees, others agree, that there was nothing in the Constitution that or in any act that explicitly gave Trump the power to impose tariffs under the Emergency Economic Powers Act. And so that was really the reason why they ruled against Trump. But it's in favor of Congress. Gorsuch says the major questions doctrine is not anti-administration, it is pro-Congress. And so it's making it clear that Congress has the power, not the president, to impose tariffs. And what is especially interesting about this and about this decision is our own Congress, which is controlled by the Republicans now, they're not standing up to Trump. And so even though we have a Congress that won't stand up to Trump, won't be explicit about what powers, they won't restrain anything Trump is doing, even though they have the right to do it. They just won't do it. They won't stand up. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who's from Louisiana, where I'm from, I'm so ashamed of that. He won't do anything adverse to the interest of Trump. So thank goodness we have the Supreme Court that is saying Trump doesn't have the power to impose tariffs under this International Economic Powers Act, because it doesn't specifically say that he has the power to impose tariffs. He can do other things to regulate trade, but he cannot impose tariffs. And so that's what we have. So we have a really interesting decision. Makes it very clear he doesn't have the power to impose tariffs, and because that power is held by the Congress, even though Congress won't stand up. So, maybe one day when the Republicans are no longer in power and the Democrats, hopefully in November, if they win the midterms, Congress will then exercise their power, which they won't exercise now for reasons that are unintelligible to me. I just don't understand why they're ceding so much power to Trump. But thank goodness the Supreme Court says he doesn't have the power, and it doesn't matter that Congress doesn't want to exercise it or not. But so that's just one, I think, really interesting overview of this decision. Is the court basically is saving our country from president who believes he has all the power when he really doesn't. So thank goodness for the Supreme Court, including some of the justices that he appointed. So that's just sort of my introduction to where we are and why this is such an important decision. It restrains a president who thinks he has it all when he really doesn't.
It's a great introduction, Charles, on how important it is nowadays to have clear division of powers and to understand that the rule of law has to be strong in order to have economic development and many other developments in every society. El profesor Charles Camp nos acaba de dar una primicia acerca de por qué se dio esta situación de los aranceles y por qué la Suprema Corte los invalidó, porque estaban fundamentados en la Ley de Emergencia Económica, básicamente para evitar ir al Congreso de Estados Unidos para pedir la aprobación de los aranceles, y la Suprema Corte lo mencionó claramente en su sentencia que es equivocado el fundamentar esas aranceles con esa ley, y por lo tanto tiene que tener y respetar la división de poderes y la autoridad del Congreso de los Estados Unidos para determinar esos aranceles a solicitud del presidente. Very interesting. So now, how do we get to that point where the Supreme Court took this important case?
Okay, so Sarah is going to explain how we got here and what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. So this case started with actually two different cases that were then consolidated sort of upstream. And we had 12 US states and 7 American businesses who sued Trump and numerous officials and even agencies within his administration, looking for a declaratory judgment and an injunction to say that these tariffs are illegal. So there were 2 cases. One of them started out in the Court of International Trade, which is a specific court that basically just hears trade cases. So one thing we've actually heard from the Supreme Court is they affirmed, this is going to be important later on, they affirmed that the Court of International Trade is the proper court with the proper jurisdiction to be hearing these cases. So in the future, when people are looking to sue for refunds, they shouldn't be doing it in your district court. It has to all go through the Court of International Trade. And so essentially the Court of International Trade sided with the plaintiffs, and they said that these tariffs under IEEPA are illegal. They're an improper use of presidential authority. And when that went to the Federal Circuit on appeal, when the government appealed, the Federal Circuit agreed. And the government appealed again and got up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said that when Congress is delegating a really important authority that's legislative under the Constitution, meaning that it is something that is solely congressional, it's a solely congressional power, if they want to give that to a different part of the government, they want to sort of delegate that to the executive branch or to the president, they have to be very, very explicit in the statutory language. And the statute here just did not say that the president can impose tariffs. Tariffs are like taxes. It's the power of the purse under Congress. So, and that's something that is, I mean, it's historically very exclusive to Congress. And so really the decision here, it's 170 pages, like Charles said. But the law is very simple, actually. It's a pretty clear-cut sort of division of powers between what the executive can do and what the legislative branch can do. And so it almost feels like a lot of this is, you have overwhelmingly, conservative, you have a conservative majority on the court, and they're sort of almost over-explaining in a way that they don't even really need to, because the statutory language here is clear, and also the powers of the president as opposed to the powers of Congress are also very clear.
So, excuse me for interrupting you, sir. I have a question. So there's no room for interpretation in this matter.
When it comes to IEEPA and when it comes to what the statute actually says, the statute says the president can regulate trade. Regulate does not mean impose taxes or tariffs. And this was something that was sort of at the center of the opinion, is that's what the government sort of relied on, is that the statutory language in IEEPA says, the government, the president can regulate trade and in times of, when there's a crisis of national security, but regulate and impose tariffs are two completely different things.
Right. And if I could just add, in the opinion of the court, which is the part that gives the majority opinion, it states that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution sets forth the powers of the legislative branch. That's Congress. The first clause of Article 1 of Section 8 states that the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. And it says the power to tax was, according to Alexander Hamilton, the most important of the authorities proposed to be conferred upon the Union. In other words, the most important thing that Congress has the power to do is impose taxes and duties. And so there's nothing in the Constitution that authorizes president to do that. He doesn't have the power. And if you were to delegate this or change this, you would have to have something, as Sarah said, very explicit. It's a major question. When you have, it's called a major questions doctrine. When you have something that is so important that it will affect basically the entire foundation of the state, of the government.
Balance of powers.
The balance of powers. It has to be a major question. And here, Trump said in the State of the Union the other night that we could probably do away with the income tax if we could just get the tariffs done. Well, number one, that's impossible and ridiculous. But number two, that's how big he thinks the tariffs are. That's what a major thing it is. If you could replace income taxes with tariffs, that by definition would fall under the major questions doctrine, the president can only have that power if it's explicitly given to him, and it wasn't. So I just wanted to point out that.
So you're getting ready to stop paying income tax?
Yeah, I'm all for that. Now, unfortunately, it is tax time, and it's not my favorite time. But gotta pay your taxes, and I'm sure I paid plenty of tariffs. And as I sent you earlier today, I looked up how many cases have been filed in the U.S. Court of International Trade since January 1 seeking refunds. And it's almost up to 2,000. I checked a couple of days ago, and since then there was like another, 300 cases. So, the list of cases filed for refunds is now up to like 85 pages long. Just a list is 85 pages long.
They're going to start hiring more people over their international trade court, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good.
Carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one other thing I wanted to mention here is when the Supreme Court struck down the president's authority to impose these tariffs, they were talking about two different tariffs, actually, that he had imposed under IEEPA. One of them was, one type of tariff was a drug trafficking tariff. It was imposed against Mexico, Canada, and China.
Because of the fentanyl.
Smuggling. It was like a punishing sort of tariff, supposedly, for these countries smuggling illegal drugs and fentanyl through the U.S. into the U.S. border.
Well, actually, they announced that the cartels were terrorist organizations, and that will actually detonate another statute that will allow the U.S. government to intervene militarily.
Yeah.
But with due process.
Well, but I'm sorry. I interrupted.
That's another topic.
This administration, you can say a lot about them, but the lawyers are creative, if nothing else, and they find a way. And even if that's struck down by the courts later on, they're definitely willing to push the outer boundaries of what we've considered acceptable
Exactly.
for a very, very long time.
I agree with you. I'm sorry, Charles, but I've got to say this thing, because this kind of strategies, they get developed in a room with the authorities, and they say, okay, we're going to do this. How can we do it? And someone came up with the idea of IEPA and say, oh, we might get a chance to get around Congress and put tariffs. But they didn't, I believe they didn't measure the consequences, and that idea would have. So yeah. So right now we're seeing this situation about this tariff scheme under that law, and all the consequences that has under the law in the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's interesting, good news that came post this ruling. Was basically immediately after the Supreme Court came down with this decision, Trump issued an executive order halting all collection of the tariffs under IEPA that were struck down by the Supreme Court. And so to me, that was positive, because at least it looked like he was, intended to follow what the Supreme Court was saying. But that was really just it was a technicality, because there was a press conference immediately after this holding where he made it clear, basically in no uncertain terms, that they were just going to figure out another way to impose the tariffs that they want to impose. They're just going to be using a different statutory authority under a different section of a different statute. And so we've already seen, and Trump has already issued a proclamation issuing 10% global tariffs under a different section of the Trade Act of 1974. That authority under that particular statute, he can only issue those tariffs for up to 150 days, I believe. Yeah. And there's a ceiling of 15%. So right now the tariffs that he set are at 10. And after the 100,
I thought they went to 15.
Did he raise them already?
It's the next day.
Did he?
I think he raised them the next day. He said 10%, and then the next day he raised them to 15.
All right, so we hit the ceiling then already.
We're already at the ceiling.
Yes.
And he basically announced, the administration has announced their intention to use this 150-day period to begin investigations under different sections of the Trade Act to look into what other tariffs they can impose. And so actually, I think earlier today, it was the U.S. trade rep, Greer, went on a podcast for Fox, and basically said, we're not waiting for Congress to help us implement a new tariff regime. We're not waiting for anyone. We sort of already know what we're doing, and we're going to kind of keep moving forward. We have 2 different avenues that we're already pursuing to create a new tariff regime that will replace what was happening under IEPA.
Yeah.
That will give, the flexibility that the administration wants to sort of do whatever they want. And that means, flexibility regarding country to country, regarding lowering and increasing rates. And so we're sort of still in this era of unpredictability with what the administration can do and will do.
That's very, very important topic. Actually, Jason Greer gave that press conference yesterday, and I would like to get deep on that. We're gonna go to a break. Estamos transmitiendo en vivo desde el Campus Monterrey en vía directa con la ciudad de Washington, D.C., la capital de Estados Unidos, con nuestros especialistas del día de hoy, Josephine Gray, Sarah Nersesov y Charles Camp, abogados y especialistas de la Universidad George Washington de la capital de Estados Unidos. Estamos transmitiendo 94.9 FM y texasradio.tech.mx. Siga con nosotros, volvemos en unos minutos. Gracias por permanecer con nosotros. Estamos transmitiendo Negocios sin Fronteras desde el campus Monterrey vía Zoom desde Washington, D.C. con nuestros especialistas de esta tarde, Josephine Gray, Sarah Nersesov y Charles Camp de la Universidad George Washington, analizando el tema de los aranceles y la importante decisión de la Suprema Corte de Justicia que invalida estos aranceles bajo la Ley de Emergencia Económica. Resumen de lo que estuvimos platicando en la primera media hora. 2 asuntos fueron presentados en la Corte Internacional de Comercio de Estados Unidos que fueron los que originaron esta situación. Usaron la Ley de Emergencia Económica, mejor conocida en inglés como IEPA. Es un uso inapropiado de la autoridad presidencial, fue lo que dijo la Suprema Corte. Indicó que debe quedar expresado en la ley secundaria que el presidente tiene esa autoridad delegada del Congreso para imponer aranceles. El estatuto de la IEPA indica que el presidente puede regular el comercio, pero esto no implica imponer aranceles. Fue otro de los argumentos que esgrimió la Corte. Por último, la autoridad de imponer impuestos de importación es exclusivamente del Congreso y eso está establecido desde la época del presidente Jefferson. So we continue with this analysis. I just gave a brief translation of what we talk about in the first half hour. And please, Josephine, if you explain us, what is this going to, what's going to happen with the refunds? What's going to happen with this decision of the U.S. Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think just to start, honestly, the most important thing that this case really offered was it's a historic victory for the separation of powers, which Charles had started with. This was a really big power grab, and for the Chief Justice to write this opinion and then having a concurring opinion by Gorsuch strongly, stopping this from happening, which they've been kind of in his back pocket, was really big. And then as far as refunds go, it was a financial win for U.S. importers. Eduardo, you had said consequences, that they didn't really realize the consequences they were going to have when they were using the IEPA to kind of grab these tariffs. I mean, it's $175 billion of refunds owed. And so the importers, those are the ones who are directly eligible for these refunds. Of course, this is smaller businesses and then the consumers themselves who had also felt the pressure and had to pay for these tariffs as well. I think it's going to start off with the importers getting these refunds, and then it's going to cascade down to the smaller businesses and corporations who had to pay. I'm not exactly sure how consumer relief is going to go.
Pritzker.
Yes, I think you have some champions who are going to try to help the individual consumers. Like you have the Illinois Pritzker kind of wrote to the
governor of Illinois, right?
The governor, yes,
Illinois, right?
Who is demanding $1,700 for each family in Illinois.
He sent a bill.
Yeah, he
Sends a bill.
He calls it, it's his invoice.
He sent an invoice for over $8 billion to Trump.
Wow.
For the people,
Saying
for the people of Illinois.
this money.
It's almost $9 billion worth that so you have people like that who are trying to champion for those who, the payments kind of fell upon. I think for now, it's not exactly sure how this is going to go. They didn't describe the how in the majority opinion, which is one of Kavanaugh's dissenting criticisms, is that, quote unquote, this is going to be a mess because the majority didn't really issue how to go about this, obviously because of the scale. For now, I think importers are just going to be requesting refunds through the Customs and Border Protection, and then, putting their complaints in through the Court of International Trade. One of the bigger cases going in now in complaints, you have FedEx, Costco, Goodyear, among others.
Prada.
Prada. As Charles mentioned, already in the year, there's almost 2,000 complaints that have gone through. They're stayed for now until VOS is complete and unappealable. But that's not stopping, of course, and it shouldn't stop companies and importers from at least getting their complaints in. Interestingly, obviously, they don't really know exactly what refund they want or what the exact amount is. So they're putting their complaints in, but they're not putting that specific number.
The importers know, but not everybody else.
Right. Well, so they're kind of, I guess, placing themselves in with the complaint, and then they are reviewing these voluminous data of however much they spent on these tariffs, and then they also have to deduce, it has to be exactly this specific tariff, it can't be a different one. So I think a lot of corporations and a lot of counsel are telling their companies to start that process and figure out exactly how much they paid, so they're accurately able to ask for their refund. This has never exactly happened before. I mean, on a such smaller scale, they have pulled back taxes, one specific tax, harbor maintenance tax, that's been used as precedent thereafter. But that was 4,000 cases and 750 million. We're looking at 300,000 cases and 175 billion. So it's honestly up in the air exactly what's going to happen, how long it's going to take. And I mean, they're going to have a lot of sifting of documents and complaints to go through.
And you know, and there's a lot of things, as you know, politics will get in the way of everything. The question in my mind is Amazon, which knows exactly how much tariffs were passed on to consumers, is Amazon going to have the guts to file a lawsuit like Federal Express did and all the others? Because it's owned by Bezos. Bezos has Blue, what's it called? Blue, the rocket.
Oh, yes, with the White House new. I mean, anyway, basically, that's like asking his best friend to start paying it. It's not going to work out.
Exactly. And so, but there are shareholders of Amazon. But, you know, is politics going to get in the way of Amazon demanding a refund for all the people that bought goods through them? Amazon is huge.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Huge companies asking for a refund. Almost 2,000 lawsuits filed for the international already
since January.
But the question is, doesn't this contradict what the President Trump said in the State of the Union speech about foreign countries are the one that pays for the tariffs?
Absolutely not.
The foreign countries don't pay tariffs.
Okay, could you explain a little bit more of that? Because in Spanish we have repeated that many times, but we want to hear it in English.
Well,
But it's the U.S. importers are paying the tax. It's not the exporters. I mean, it's another false statement by our terrible leader.
Yeah. So
he says what MAGA will believe, regardless of whether it has any ground in fact or law. And his own lawyers don't want to tell him the bad news. You know, he's apparently, I've heard separately, it's like the worst client ever. I never want to represent him. Every firm I've ever worked at before I started my own 23 years ago refused to represent him because, you know, he wouldn't take their advice and he wouldn't pay their bills. So, you know, he's on his own. This is a lark of his own because he believes tariffs are the greatest thing ever, says it's his favorite word. But nothing is going to work out like he hopes because fortunately, it appears we still have a strong Supreme Court.
And just to follow up on that in terms of like sort of the mechanics of the tariffs are they're a tax that are paid once an item arrives at the border of the United States. And so even if you look at who brought this case before the Supreme Court saying we've been injured by these tariffs, it was 12 United States of the United States, and Union. It was seven American non-importer businesses who were basically their stated injury, because in order to have standing to go before a court, you have to have an injury in fact that was caused by whatever it is that you're there suing for, you know. And in this case, they're suing for an injunction against these tariffs. And so their injury was, this has messed with our business. This has messed with our supply chain. This has increased our costs tremendously. It's caused a crazy amount of uncertainty in once we have, you know, a lot of American businesses produce and manufacture in China. And so they'll have finished products that they're supposed to be getting in from China when they arrive at the border. The unpredictability of the tariff rates, or what's going to be imposed, or if a tariff is going to be imposed, has caused these injuries to American businesses who are not importers themselves. So it's residual, it's indirect. So really, everyone's been feeling the effects, whether you're in the United States or you're not in the United States, whether you're a business or you're a consumer. I think everyone across the board is just unanimously like, these are not working for us,
So, but Josephine, what do you think about class actions?
I think it's, there could be a class action. It's interesting I'm having trouble, and maybe you know the answer to this, but like, who's going to have standing to address this problem? And then, of course, so many people felt the effects. How are they going to consolidate and choose a class, and who's going to represent the class? Like, I think that's going to take such a long time in and of itself. What's going to happen to the refunds by that point? I mean, I don't know if we can trust where this money's going to go, how people are going to get it back, by what time.
And the question is, with the importers that passed on the tariffs, do they have the right to recover it? And do they have to pass it on to the consumers that they passed on the tariffs to? That's a really big problem. And I think that is going to be used by the Trump administration to say, well, we can't give you refunds because we're not going to give the money to importers that passed on the tariffs. The importers, they passed it on, they haven't been injured. So it's a question of everybody that files is going to have to prove that they had an injury. And, Trump was threatening car companies, a lot of different companies, not to pass on the tariffs. But some did, some didn't. My personal view is I think it's going to take some legislation to decide who gets the refunds.
We're going to need
so big.
We're going to need another hour to talk about these important topics, and we're getting ready for our final remarks. I'm going to just translate a little bit. Lo que hemos estado platicando es que de esta decisión de la Suprema Corte se han derivado ya 2,000 juicios de reembolso que han sido presentados ante el Tribunal de Comercio Internacional de los Estados Unidos por estos importadores. Inclusive algunos gobernadores de más de 20 estados de la Unión Americana han solicitado el reembolso en favor de sus habitantes. Consideran que un paso importante de esta sentencia es que deja clarísimo la separación de poderes y qué le corresponde al Congreso y qué le corresponde al presidente de los Estados Unidos. También nos comentaron acerca de los aranceles. ¿Quién paga los aranceles? Se ha dicho que el presidente Trump lo comunicó en su discurso el martes pasado, que los países extranjeros son los que pagan los aranceles, y pues nada más lejos de la verdad que eso. Son los importadores, las empresas importadoras las que pagan los aranceles, y esto se ha derivado también en demandas colectivas, que es lo que se prevé que va a suceder también, demandas colectivas para solicitar estos reembolsos. So we're getting ready for final remarks. Please, if you give us a final speech, Josephine, Sarah, Charles, for all our audience.
I just have one final thought, and then you can say whatever you'd like. I'm so impressed with Gorsuch, and there's just one more thing I want to read to your listeners, because I think it's just incredible. He says, highly resourceful members of the executive branch have strong incentives to exploit any doubt in Congress's past work to assume new powers for themselves. The major questions doctrine helps prevent that kind of exploitation. And then he says, our founders understood that men are not angels, and we disregard that insight at our peril when we allow the few, or the one, to aggrandize their power based on loose or uncertain authority. So it's just, I'm so proud of Gorsuch that, and our founders have understood, executives are not angels, and they like power, and they want all the power they can get. But that's not how the Constitution works, and that's not how the laws work. And I'm thrilled as an international lawyer to see the rule of law still has a place in the United States, because there's so many things that have been disregarded by our government. Thousands of court orders have been ignored by the administration. It's just unbelievable. But finally, rule of law seems to be prevailing, and hopefully it will continue. But it's going to depend on people faithfully applying and complying with the Constitution, which is what Trump agreed to do when he was sworn in. But so far, we haven't seen it. So those are my final thoughts.
Thank you, Charles. We're going to hope for the best. Again, Sarah, Josephine, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to sort of to add on to that, I'm hoping that with the litigation that starts to unfold after this holding, that the Supreme Court will sort of keep that backbone that they've showed in this decision, because already we're seeing these new tariffs that he just imposed that were like immediately after the Supreme Court came out with its holding. He is claiming the justification under the statute he's claiming is a balance of payments deficit. So these global tariffs are in response to a balance of payments deficit around the world.
Not a trade deficit.
Not a trade deficit. Balance of payments. So meaning the U.S. is sending out more cash to buy things from other countries than other countries are sending us cash that other countries are sending us to buy things from us.
And there isn't such a balance of payments deficit.
And so already we have economic experts coming out and saying, under the statute, it has to be a large and significant balance of payments deficit in order to justify presidential tariff action, right? Not only is there not a large and significant deficit, there is no balance of payments deficit. And that's what the experts are saying. All of this to say that I don't think we've seen the last of court challenges to Trump's tariffs. I think this is just sort of the beginning of, I think that, like we said, his Justice Department, his lawyers are creative. His Commerce Department, his trade representative office they're creative. But I think that, or I'm hoping that as they sort of try to get around this ruling by going through different, statutory pathways and under different statutory authority, that we'll keep seeing the courts, hold the line. And not let them get away with whatever it is they're trying to get away with, and circumventing this opinion by going a different route.
And I think characterizing the government lawyers as creative is a huge understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not. If this is creative, they ought to all be disbarred.
I mean, I'm not trying to get, I don't want to slander anyone.
So we're not. It's my opinion.
So
they're not even trying to comply. They're
here.
Trying to do what the king says he wants done. Anyway, Josephine, do you have
definitely? Yeah, definitely. We're gonna need another hour to talk about this, another show. Josephine, your final remarks.
I would just say I'm happy with the Supreme Court. They put their foot down, which was awesome. And some of the justices that normally haven't been in this administration thus far showed that they're capable of doing that, and they still uphold the Constitution, which is awesome. I'm curious to see what the Court of International Trade does once the stay is pulled. They could make it a lot easier. I don't know if they will, but we'll see what they do, and people are just going to keep putting their complaints in and start tallying how much they spent. And so we'll see what happens with this money, but I'm excited to see. And I'm happy with my court. So
let's hope for the best. So time has run out. I'm very, very pleased and thankful for your time. Thank you, Josephine. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Charles, for your generosity, and greetings through you to all the George Washington Law School community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, for the opportunity. It's our honor.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Gracias a la producción, gracias sobre todo a ustedes. Esto fue Negocios sin Fronteras 94.9 FM, transmitiendo desde el TEC de Monterrey. Gracias, que tengan excelente tarde.
que el conocimiento se convierta en oportunidades. Esto fue Negocios sin Fronteras. No te pierdas nuestra siguiente emisión mañana en punto de las 5 de la tarde. Negocios sin Fronteras con Eduardo Mendívil y Samuel Peña.